And welcome to our latest edition of Inside JEFCOED, the podcast that talks about the people and places of Jefferson County Schools. I'm John Huddleston, your host for this half hour here. And I'm joined today by a person that really needs no introduction. He has been the superintendent of Jefferson County Schools since November of 2019. Now, 4.5 years later now. Wow. So Dr. Walter Gonsoulin joins us today, and also my boss. It's very nice to see you today.
Nice to see you as well, and it's good to be here to do this podcast.
Well, we certainly appreciate you joining us today. You've been in the seat for, I just said 4.5 years now. Does it seem like it's been that long?
No, it doesn't. It doesn't seem it's like it was yesterday that I was appointed, but, you know, we've had a lot of interesting things to happen over the last 4.5 years, so I guess time flies when you're having fun.
Yeah, we'll get into some of that as we go on. I did want to kind of start, though, at the beginning. When I say the beginning, I really mean the beginning, because I think a lot of folks maybe don't know your background.
Right.
Correct me if I'm wrong here, but the oldest of 6 children, right?
Oldest of 6.
The only boy, too,
and
right?
the
5
only
sisters.
male. That's right. That's correct.
What was that like growing up?
I was glad to leave the house. They didn't have to ask me to. But no, it was good. You know, have 5 beautiful siblings, sisters, and a close-knit family, living with my mother and grandmother, and so it's a very nurturing background.
Yeah, your mother was a chef, right? And your
Yes.
father also was a taxi driver.
Yeah, my father was a taxi driver for 33 years,
Wow.
And my mother was a chef, and she also worked other local jobs, custodian too as well.
Yeah. Early on, really, you developed a love for education, and really specifically a love for reading too, didn't you?
I really did. And as a matter of fact, it was one of those things that I used to, those were my vacations. You know, those were those times. I used books to escape. I used books to venture all across the nation and the world. And I never forget, I loved reading so much, and it just came natural to me that when I was in the 3rd grade, I got an award for reading, and I just could not understand how that someone would give you an award for doing something that you love. I didn't even know it was possible. And so I said, okay, this is pretty good. We're going to be okay.
Did you realize, too, pretty early on that education was really kind of your ticket to get where you wanted to go?
Yeah, I really did. And that was nurtured by my mother and my grandmother. It was a speech every other day about the importance of education. And, you know, coming from Louisiana, where my grandmother and great-grandmother, they didn't have the same opportunities to go to school. And so they would encourage us to do it, and in particular me.
Yeah, in your own words, I know you've said you came from pretty modest means.
Yes, came from very modest means, and I think they would call it an impoverished neighborhood today. I never knew it was impoverished growing up because there was so much love and support, but you know, our priorities, you know, they put the priorities straight, and they had it straight.
I've heard you talk too about you kind of combined. You knew education was kind of your way, and
Right.
but you also had to figure out a way to do it and to pay for it all. And your way happened to be going into the military, right?
That's right. That's right. As a matter of fact, because my uncles and family members, they were military, and that was my goal coming straight out of school. You know, I would think as early as 7 and 8 years old, my vacations in the summer was visiting the Army bases, Fort Polk and all of that, and going and spending time with my uncle and aunt. And that was amazing because you wake up in the morning and all of the tanks and soldiers are going to work, and I was like, a parade every day. You know, as a young kid, you know, I get out early in the morning to make sure that I would witness that. Right. And so I had my mind set on the military. But then as I moved closer and navigated my way through high school, I realized that you could do both, and I didn't have to choose this or that. I could choose this and that.
And you were 16 when you enlisted, right?
I enlisted at 16 years old. Remember, I had 5 sisters. It was time to go, man.
They're going to get you for saying that.
Yeah,
too.
they will.
So I'm going to make sure I send them the link to this.
Well, we laugh about it all the time.
Absolutely. I know. You can tell it comes from nothing but love when you say
That's
that.
right.
For sure.
That's right.
So,
that's right.
But really in the military, I mean, you joined and then you went into the Guard, right?
I went into the Guard, and and I did the Guard, of course, part-time, and then college as well. But then in the midst of that, I think 3-4 years in, I was activated to full-time duty and deployed to Desert Storm, Desert Shield.
Yeah, what was that like?
It was different.
Yeah.
You know, it was different, but it was rewarding in such a way whenever you get a chance to fight for your country, you know. And so that's how I looked at it, you know, having an opportunity and then being able to tell the stories, you know, be able to sit at the table with my uncles and have some of the same stories that they told about Vietnam and other things.
Yeah. What really turns you on to education? And when I say education, I don't mean necessarily you going to school, but pursuing that as a career, I guess. Because originally you were thinking about doing communications, right?
Yes. Yeah. That was my first. That was my first major, mass communication, and then I switched it to interpersonal counseling and communication. But everything is tied to, you know who you're close to, and I had a family member. I have a family member that was in that spent a significant amount of time in education, and she persuaded me to seek my second degree in elementary education, and so I started working with that, and it was just an insatiable love for me. It was an insatiable love for learning, and I saw, you know, continuing to go to school, and so I saw what it had done for me and for my family. And so I wanted to share that with as many people as I could. And that's why I chose education, the field of education, because the most rewarding thing for me and I'm going to date myself here, but in the spring of 1990, when, I can't believe it's been 34 years, but the spring of 1990 as I began to teach, and I really fell in love with the students that I was teaching, and how we were reaching them. And I had this unique class because these children, they had all they were behind at least 2 grade levels, and so they gave the newbie that class, and it was interesting.
And this was your first teaching?
My first teaching.
And this was at
Jeanneret Elementary School.
I'm glad you pronounced it because I knew I was about to butcher it if I tried to say it.
Jeanneret Elementary School, right.
Wow. In Jeanneret, Louisiana.
In Jeanneret, Louisiana.
Your great-grandmother gave you some advice before before you went in there. Talk about that and really kind of how that shaped that experience, but then also kind of shaped your career too.
Right, and that's where I was leading to, because it's a part of the journey. But I was very excited about going to teach and to teach these children in particular, because I had heard that people had given up on them, and so as I was talking to my great grandmother about it, she said, "Well, if you really want to get to know them, if you really want to do a great job in teaching them, get to know them." And she said, within the first 30 days, try to visit each of the homes of each of these children. And at first, I was fascinated by what she was saying, but I didn't understand the significance of it, right? But I scheduled it. I scheduled the meetings with the parents, and they were so appreciative. The parents were, and they were welcoming too. You know, there were times that I had to cut the meeting short. I didn't think they were going to let me go home. After school, it's 5, 6 o'clock in the evening. You're still talking with them, but I got to know. I got to know those children, and I got to know their situations.
And that made a difference in the classroom too, right?
It made a difference because with the children, they respected me for respecting them and valuing their families. Now, it might be because now they know I know their parents personally. Right.
They're only a phone call away.
On a phone call away. He knows where I live. The man might drive up to my house, you know, if there's a problem. I don't know what it was, but there was a special bond after those 30 days.
So that's early 90s. You go through the 90s. You go back to school. You start earning your different degrees. Right. Eventually get your doctorate. What kind of propelled you going from the classroom into I say I want to be an administrator. I want, and eventually like a superintendent. What kind of propelled you that way?
You know, it became natural because when I saw the impact that I had on those children, especially because I got the same types of children the next school year, and we were achieving. You know, the children were on state standardized tests. They were doing well, and I saw the impact that I had on a group of children in the classroom. So immediately I said, you know, I would like to have the same impact on every child in the school. And then when you become an assistant principal and a principal, then in my mind, how I think, I was like, I wouldn't mind doing that for the district. And so that helped me go from level to level, wanting to have an impact on more and more children.
So it's kind of like you felt like you were meeting one goal, and then you want to keep improving and bettering yourself, and the way you do that is moving up to hopefully better others at the same time.
That's correct. You know, just want to have more impact, more influence on the children that I was coming into contact with.
So your career kind of started in Louisiana, and then you started moving east a little bit. Went to Mississippi, and then ended up here in Birmingham area. Started at Fairfield in 2012, I believe.
2012.
Yeah,
Right.
And then came here in 2017 to JEFCOED in 2017 as a deputy superintendent under Dr. Pouncey at that time.
That's correct.
And then you got the full-time job after Dr. Pouncey left and went to Coastal Community College in 2019, the interim job, and then appointed superintendent in November of that year. And you know, the headlines read, I believe, first African-American superintendent of Jefferson County Schools,
Right.
permanent.
Right,
First, yeah. What did that mean for you personally?
Which part? The last part?
Yes.
That meant a whole lot, you know. But I would say this, you know, I was grateful and appreciative the fact that, and I appreciate the fact that I was the superintendent of Jefferson County Schools, because I really enjoyed working under Dr. Pouncey, and I always wanted a large district. Again, that fascination with influence over more and more people. But when they added that piece onto it, that did something special to me as well, because it was, I'll say it how my grandson says it. So when he's 11 now, but when he was 9 or 10, he became fascinated with Google, right? And so he Googled my name, and it came up on the internet.
Yeah.
And boy, he started screaming in the car and said, "Papa, you are famous," right? And I was like, okay, I guess since I'm on Google, I'm famous. But he began to repeat those same words, and to be able to have a conversation with my grandson on having being etched in history for such a achievement was something that was very special to me, and also to be able to remember the shoulders of the people that I stand upon, the people who paved the way. And if you know the history of Jefferson County Schools, then that itself it makes someone very humble and thankful for being in that position.
Absolutely, absolutely. Very, very well said. I do want to go back to one thing you were talking about just a second ago, though, and you mentioned working in a larger district. That's something you always wanted to do. And I don't know if I've actually ever heard you say that before.
Yes.
And everything. Why? Just because of the challenges that you face maybe in a larger district, or just the diversity? What is it?
Well, I think it goes back to, again, what I said from the classroom. Being able to have impact on more people. You know, I've always been fascinated with the large district, enjoyed the small district, right? But, you know, just intrigued by the concept of leading a school district of 35,000, 55,000, 100,000. I might be hurting for punishment, you know, glutton for punishment with that, but I like the whole concept of it.
Yeah. COVID happened, what, I guess 4 months after you...
4 months in.
Yeah. What was, when that happens, what's going through your mind at that point? What have I gotten myself into?
Well,
because I was brand new at that point too in communications,
right,
and I think I
right.
had that same thought. I think I
Right.
was 6 weeks into my tenure then.
Right.
So,
you know, I lived through and worked through Katrina.
right.
And you know, when you lived and worked through that, that was an experience all within itself. And you think you're only going to do it one time in your lifetime, right? And so then all of a sudden COVID hits, and I'm like, Lord, I mean, what have I done to deserve this? You know, two of these experiences. And I was a principal and a professor during COVID. I mean, during Katrina.
Right.
But now I'm the superintendent, and so you know, COVID was my experience with Katrina helped because when you're facing a situation that's new and bigger than everyone around, there were some things that I learned. You know, number one, don't panic, right? And constant meeting to within that moment. Don't look too far ahead. You know, I learned. I think I may have, when you guys in cabinet meetings, I would tell you, let's look at this thing from 7 to 14 days. You know, but I knew, because if you tried to go further than that, it was too large for you. Too many things changed during that time. But yeah, COVID was an experience, but it helped us grow as an organization because we learned some skills. And we learned that we had a skill set, not only as individuals, but we had a skill set as an organization. Our ability to pivot. You know, a lot of decisions being made. Some were good decisions, some were not so good decisions. But it showed the endurance. What I always say is that just like a person has a personality, the organization has a personality too. And it helped us develop our personality to where we could listen, we could communicate, because we had to learn. And I was thankful for you coming on because you taught us how. You know, I still remember the drip. Was it the drip?
Yeah, the drip. Yeah,
the
misinformation can it can turn into a big old puddle at the end. So yeah.
So it helped. It helped me grow as a leader, to care about people too, and not just the children, because we're gonna care about the children, you know, but also the faculty and staff, you know, because they're afraid too. Right. It's new to everybody. Right. And so. And then, you know, I would say it taught us how to handle conflict, because there was a lot of conflict. And in this particular situation, it didn't matter what decision you made. 50% of the people were going to agree with it, and 50% of the people were not. And it forced me as a leader in this organization to lead even when people disagree, and how to adjust to that, you know. So it was stressful.
But how do you do that, I guess, is my question, because I mean, I was obviously in your cabinet meetings, and we would hear the same stuff and the complaints, and it's just at some point, I mean, and it wasn't even directly directed at me, but it was directed at you a lot of times, unfortunately.
Right.
I mean, how do you deal with that as a person, though? I mean, it's hard.
Well, you have to. Oh, yeah, it's very hard, you know. So as a leader, again, you know, some things happen to people and it crushes them, and other people it allows them to bounce back. And so I just had the personality that it helped me grow, because there were times when I had to look people in the eyes and say, yes, we could do that, and then we'd move on. But then I learned and became comfortable with saying, no, we can't do that, and still had to lead, right? And like you said, you know, you asked the question, how do you do that? Man, it takes a special person with a special supporting cast. Like the people that I work with, the cabinet, the deputies, the principals, everybody was willing to follow. And when they weren't, because we all got frustrated at times. Yeah. Everybody gets frustrated at times. Yeah. I had to learn as a leader to allow them to, allow people to get frustrated, and then allow myself to get frustrated too. Yeah. Just as long as we were not frustrated at the same time. Yeah. We were good.
Yeah. No, I know what you're talking about, because I remember phone calls between you and I sometimes where I would get frustrated. You would just let me vent sometimes. Right. So, yeah, I mean, I definitely hear where you're coming from on that. Had you not gone through Katrina, do you feel like you wouldn't have had some of those, and this maybe is an obvious question, but it certainly set the stage where you felt more empowered, where you could handle a situation like this, I think.
Yes, that and also being deployed
Yeah.
for Desert Storm. Somehow those very hard things, right? It really emotionally hard, don't know what to expect. But Katrina really did it because I knew it was possible, and I knew some of the possible pitfalls. I knew that we had to stay engaged with children.
Right.
Because if we didn't, then we would lose them. There would be people that you would think, what happened to them? Did they move away? When I was in New Orleans, the New Orleans area, there were a lot of children that never returned, and we thought that they had been shipped all over the country, some other places. They were 3 blocks away.
Yeah, I remember you saying that when we were starting this, and when we first started coming back, first to remote, and then we gave the option of if you want to be remote, whatever, and you telling in our principals meetings, go find those kids.
Go find them.
Go find those kids.
That's right. That's right. Because there were times that I would ride in those neighborhoods,
right,
to look for them because I had seen it before. I tasted that meal before, and I knew that there were children who wouldn't come to school but be walking around in the community, and they would get lost if someone wasn't constantly connecting with them and their families.
Yeah. Moving forward to present day, JEFCOED on the latest report card was an 81B. I think I have that score correct, a B.
You are right.
Yeah, and that's a good starting point. I don't think anybody was disappointed with where we are, but what's your goals, I guess, moving forward for this district?
So I'm a competitor, but more than a competitor, I have a passion for people achieving in the area of education, children learning and having evidence to show that they're learning. And so my goal is for this district, as large as it is, as diverse as it is. And when I say diverse, I'm not just talking about ethnicity. I'm talking about diverse in our learning styles, our economic situations. I want to see this district be an A district. But I know that in order for that to happen, as we have pivoted, from the beginning of my tenure to now, that we're going to have to constantly change and constantly force ourselves and challenge ourselves to get better in every area. And that is allowing me to grow as well, to see the bigger picture.
One area that we saw a pretty significant growth, I believe, last year from this past school year to the year before that was CCR, College and Career Readiness, and everything. And that went up a good bit. And we saw it specifically in some schools that had been struggling, quite frankly, in that area. We saw that a good bit.
That's right, because we had some schools. We're constantly analyzing the data to see where we fall, and we had some schools that were very low. And so using that data, and we become a very data-driven district, meaning that we look at numbers, we look at situations, and we said, okay, is this acceptable? Does it meet the standards? And then we either, if the answer is yes, we're meeting the standards, then we stay the course. If it's not, then we figure out how to pivot. And so that's what we did with career CCR credentials. And we use a lot of acronyms in education. But when we talk about children, more children getting credentials, that means with those 9 things that you see, that means that we have more children that's going to college. We have more children that's going to the military. We have more children that's taking dual enrollment courses, that's taking college courses. We have more children who have the credentials to enter into the workforce. So it becomes more than just a number. It becomes, man, this is important for your livelihood.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up, because I think that's been one thing that has shifted probably over the last 25 years. Used to it was go to elementary, go to middle school, work hard in high school, and get into a good college.
Right.
And now we're seeing it where you don't necessarily have to do that. You can get a really good paying job straight out of high school if you feel like that's the best path for you. And that's one thing that really kind of led to the launch of the Signature Academies too.
It did. Because we want to provide real opportunities for people, for children, that allows them to be productive citizens. anytime a child can graduate high school and go straight into being a fireman, making $55,000 a year, I think that's very significant. You know, we talk about my beginnings, you know, as some humble beginnings. I don't think I know we didn't. We didn't have anybody in the house that made $55,000 a year, and we had grown people there. And that is the same for many of our parents that we're serving. But even, you know, for those parents who are educated, making a good living, they want an opportunity for their children so that they can have jobs straight out of high school while they're going to college, if they choose to do that, or just go straight to the workforce. But that's our goal. Our goal is to, while we strive to be that A district, but that we help people along the way and we make their lives better.
Absolutely. One thing we do a lot of around here at JEFCOED, we like to build things. So we built, I think in 2020, we began opening the 6 new elementary schools over a course a couple years there. Then we had Fultondale High School just opened this past August. IB school construction is well underway. I haven't been out there yet, but I know you said it. You can start to see the shape of it and everything.
You can definitely see the shape of it. We have some resemblance of walls, and we have. It's interesting. There are doors up that's not attached to anything. It's the most fascinating thing.
Yeah. Yep. And talk, before we move on, but talk about that and how important that's going to be for our district, specifically from the standpoint of they're going to have their own spot, not only their own spot, but we're going to see the combination of the middle school and the high school coming together under one campus.
You know, we're striving to have each and every one of our programs to be very competitive. Now, we have the numbers that show that our middle school, 6th through 8th, the JCIB middle school, is one of the top middle schools in the state. They receive the Blue Ribbon Award, and when you look at the number of children and the percentage that pass the math, that benchmark on the math and the reading, they go from number 1 to number 2. They go back and forth with that in the state, right? Yeah. Our high school is the same way, but now our high school, they are, their numbers are not independent. They have to share that with Shades Valley students. But we know their numbers, and so now we know that when we extract those children and have them from 6 to 12, then you're talking about a school that is will be one of the most competitive schools in the state and in the nation. I think right now the high school is ranked, and even though their scores are not independent, ranked number 16th in the nation. I think that's the last numbers I heard. So I think when we pull those numbers out and they're standing alone, you're going to see top 2, top 5 for sure.
Absolutely. And another thing that was just announced recently, and granted, as we sit here and talk in the spring of 2024, as we're taping this, has not yet been board approved, but we did just recently announce our intentions, at least, to build a new Clay-Chalkville High School. Yes. I want you to address that and kind of tell folks watching this at home what the mindset was why we chose that particular campus.
Well, the committee, the Capital Project Committee, they just gave a recommendation to choose Clay-Chalkville as a new school to build. And they went through a process of analyzing, using external data to look at the age of a building, the capacity of the building, and then the actual population at the school. That Clay-Chalkville, that entire area is an area that is growing, not only at the high school level, but also at the middle school and one of our elementary schools there. I think all of them are seeing a growth, but I mean, we had 2 schools that's been recognized by the state as going over the capacity, and that's Clay-Chalkville High School and Bryant Park Elementary School.
In that same feeder pattern.
In that same feeder pattern, right? So much so that we had to put trailers, mobile trailers outside, 4 at the elementary, and somewhere from 4 to 8 at the high school. So that tells us We're already overpopulated. We know more are coming. And so that allowed us to say we needed to build, because of the population growth there, and it's been rapid, that we need to build another Clay-Chalkville High School.
And the general thought of how this will be built out for that project, how it might unfold, is to do the football stadium first, simply from the standpoint of the current football stadium. That land will be used for the new high school, and you got to have somewhere to put the team in the interim and everything. So,
That's correct.
but just kind of talk through that process
Because
too.
we don't want to interrupt
Right.
Services for children. We want to have the least amount of disruption as possible, because teaching and learning still has to occur. And so therefore, and even the extracurricular activities. So we know, and another reason for us choosing Clay-Chalkville, because when we consider the amount of land that we already own, it's already there, we could actually do it on site. But in order to do that, we had to do it in phases. So we have to start the athletic portion first, so that when the children have to, while the school is being built, when the children have to play football and do other activities, that they either the old field, and then it will be the new field will be available to them. And once we get the new field built, then where the old field is, we can start building the school portion of it. And that would allow, and our children still could be in the old building, but existing building. They can still be in the existing building, and it won't disrupt. We've learned, because just my tenure, as a deputy superintendent and superintendent, I think we've spent close to $1 billion in construction and new schools. And so we've tried the model of renovating the school while children are at that school, in the school. Oh, we don't want to repeat that.
Yeah.
So we've chosen this model.
I want to look at too, as we start to wind down here, some of the issues that transcend Jefferson County, really, I guess, for the state too. One of the big things that came through this legislative session was school choice.
Yes.
What are your thoughts on that? And I know one thing that I've heard you say before is that in Jefferson County, we're trying to embrace that specifically with things like the signature academies.
So, when you think about school choice, they're saying that parents should have a choice to, should be allowed to choose where their children go to, the school that their children go to. So when you look at that very basic concept of it, or definition of it, I'm in favor of it. I embrace it. But what I don't want anyone to do, and I talked to a couple of legislators about this, is don't let the only choice be not to choose public education.
Right.
Include us in the conversation.
You actually went down there and
Yes,
talked to that
I gave a
Ways and Means Committee, if I remember
I gave
right.
a presentation. I'll never forget the date, February the 28th of this particular year. And that was my message to them. I said, public schools can provide choice. We have 57 schools.
Yeah.
The different 30 elementary schools, 13. I don't ever want to say the numbers because I mess them up sometimes. 13
It's hard to
high
keep
schools,
track of
that's
when,
right.
yeah.
Yes, 11 middle schools. And so we had the vision as a team and as a district that we could provide choice within those schools. And so that's how our signature academies came, to where if children wanted to be in the military, we have a signature academy of JROTC, and to where not only the children within that school zone, attendance zone can attend, but we created clusters where that's the southern zone. So not only Pleasant Grove, but Hueytown, McAdory, Oak Grove, all of those children who choose to be a part of that can do that. And it makes us stronger. We have graphic design, we have engineering, we have the early college program. And that's just the early stages. As we move forward to the future, we want to see, these are part-time programs now, but there will be those, and we're going to survey our people to see which ones we should offer on a full-time basis. That's going to allow our children to attend schools that's not in their attendance zone. And what that does, and I heard this a while back, that was said by Condoleezza Rice, and she said that a child's zip code should not determine that child's educational opportunities. I had to think on that a while to see exactly what she was saying before I said, yes, I agree with that. And so we've created a model that that allows a child, I could live here, but if I see a program that I'm interested in, then but it's not in my attendance zone, I can apply for that particular program.
We'll close with this. Where do you see, and I ask this, and look, Jefferson County is not immune to we certainly have our issues just like every other school district, but we also have a lot of great things going on, from increasing the number of scholarships that our children earn every year, the arts being such a strong department there, athletics, just a lot of great things going on 5-10 years down the road. Where do you see Jefferson County, where do you hope Jefferson County Schools will be at that point?
I just recently returned from New York, and I was looking at magnet schools programs and in one of the sessions they measured and reported how much time a child is not actually at school. And so then they showed some other statistics that said that the more time a child is in school and engaged, the higher likelihood of their grades increasing, the lesser likelihood of a child getting in trouble outside of school. And so when I heard that, what I felt was that we were aiming toward the right things, because we need to have our children in the arts, and our children are in the arts, right? And they're competing. We just had a school, Shades Valley, that competed regionally and came out in the top 5. 2 years ago, there's two theater programs that always represents the state of Alabama. It could be from any one of our 138 school districts, right? But both of those programs came from Jefferson County Schools. Came from Shades Valley and also from Corner High School. And they represented us at that level. Those are the types of things that's where I see us in 10 years, that we're connecting children to the things that they love, and they're participating in those things. I just, right before this podcast, I was in a meeting with businessmen and former Auburn coaches, and so I gave them a challenge, and that is to identify every youth program within Jefferson County Schools. And those areas that don't have a youth program, that they work with us, the school district, and that community, to either get them to the closest youth program or to establish a youth program there. And they looked at me and they said, Darwood, I said, look, they're our children, when they're in school and when they're out of school. I want to connect them as much as possible to what we're doing, so therefore we can have children participating in the arts. Our bands, we have a person, a director just over bands, and I did a study of other districts, to see if they have a director just over bands, and with very few removed from that. And but when I go to Clay-Chalkville High School and I see 185 children in the band, or when I go to Minor and I see 150 children, or Fultondale High School and I see 100 children in the band, I'm always asking for more. Always asking for more, because it tells me that if you connect those children to what they love, then they're going to be successful. And the more that we can have our hands on them and have them into something that's constructive, that's a better human being that you're developing. And so that's our goal in terms of scholarships, in terms of the arts and academics and athletics, to have well-rounded children and to connect them to their passion.
We'll leave it there. Thank you so much for your time today. I know you're a very busy person. I appreciate you taking the time out to talk with us and connecting with all our folks out there watching this.
I appreciate you, and I appreciate your team for getting this together.
Thanks a lot. And thank you certainly for watching Inside JEFCOED. We certainly appreciate this. Remember, you can find Inside JEFCOED on all our platforms at Carry JEFCOED TV. That's Roku, Amazon Fire, as well as Apple TV. And, of course, you can always log on to jeffcoed.com/TV for the latest episodes. Thanks for watching. Have a great day.